In a prison city on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, in this modest room, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, provided a vision for a fully prosperous world. It is a vision in which we learn to leave behind conflict, division, and oppression. Baha'u'llah provided the spiritual teachings, principles, institutions, laws, and practices that would help us move forward towards a lasting peace. In his summons, he called upon the North American continent, and the U.S. in particular, to play a special role.
Baha'is understand that religion is progressive, that the cause of God, as Baha'is think about it, is one thing. We've called it Judaism, we've called it Zoroastrianism, we've called it Buddhism, we've called it Christianity, we've called it Islam, and now we call it the Baha'i Faith. But we understand that all of these religions are from the same God. And we understand that they are progressive. That is, as human beings evolved, as our societies became more complex, as the problems we faced became more challenging, there was a need for a fresh infusion of spiritual energy and instructions from God about how to organize society at a higher level of complexity and competence.
The idea that the Baha'i Faith had an organization went back to Baha'u'llah. He himself ordained an administrative order that would have governing councils and a supreme governing body who he said he would always guide. This is the first time that we know in religious history that a messenger of God has ordained institutions, not individuals, but institutions, to continue their religion after their passing.
And so the Baha'i Faith brings us teachings that are specifically designed to help us understand the forces that are reorganizing the world, what those forces are, how they work, and the work that they're going to do, and to give us specific instructions about how to unify the nations, how to deal with ecological imbalance, how to deal with racial prejudice and gender discrimination, how to deal with the whole issue of a spiritual solution to economic disparities. All those issues are the issues of modernity.
Baha'u'llah's vision required a reimagining of the institutions of governance. His teachings laid out a new pattern of administration which the Baha'i community has been building around the world. Under the direction of Abdul Baha, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, the appointed head of the faith, the Baha'is in America established the first Western assemblies, the local governing bodies that would lay the groundwork for future institutions. A decade later, in 1909, a small group of Baha'is gathered in Chicago to consult on the building of the first Baha'i house of worship in the Western world.
So this very special meeting that really was the seed of what would later become the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada was held on the first day of spring, the beginning of the Baha'i New Year, March 21st, 1909.
With much of the holy writing still untranslated, naturally, the early Baha'is drew on the organizational processes and standards they were already familiar with.
Some of them had some misunderstandings themselves about basic Baha'i teachings. One was that women could not serve on Baha'i assemblies. That was totally wrong and in contradiction to the Baha'i principle of the equality of men and women. And the vast majority of believers were women.
One of those women was Corinne True, who visited Abdul Baha in 1907. She was surprised when he asked her to oversee the building of the temple. Later, 3 men from the Chicago Men's Committee visited Abdul Baha and asked him about the temple.
His reply was, "I've given all the instructions to Mrs. True. You must ask her." So they had to abolish the men's committee and the women's committee and have one committee with both sexes.
Corinne would see Abdul-Baha 5 years later in 1912 when he arrived in the United States and spent 239 days spreading his father's teachings. And in Chicago, he laid the cornerstone for the house of worship. As Abdul-Baha broke ground at the temple site, he called for several women to come forward, and then one by one, individuals from a multitude of races and nationalities.
Then in 1921, Abdul-Baha fairly suddenly passed away.
Abdul-Baha's passing was devastating for the worldwide Baha'i community and for his grandson Shoghi Effendi, who was now designated the head of the Baha'i world.
Now, in early 1922, the Baha'i world finds its new leader is this young man who is a graduate student and age 24.
Shoghi Effendi called for the establishment of local assemblies wherever 9 or more Baha'is reside and directed that Baha'i community activities be placed under their authority. 3 years later, it was time to elect the first National Spiritual Assembly of the United States and Canada.
In 1925, a group of Americans and Canadians came together at a retreat center in Maine with a very noble and unique purpose: to establish, after years of struggle, a governing body that they knew would transform the world. It is absolutely marvelous to look at the photographs, the group photographs of the 1925 convention. It's predominantly women, but it is racially, socially, ethnically diverse. It's incredible because this was the opposite of what was happening in the United States as a whole.
It was a time of intense racial conflict in the United States. We had just come out of the Red Summers, where there was literally racial warfare in 37 cities throughout the United States. Now, in that environment, the American Baha'i community was just beginning to develop, and it had very specific instructions from the head of the faith that we were to build a racially integrated spiritual community. You can imagine what a challenge that was in the context of what was happening at the time.
When the votes were counted, the new 9-member assembly included 2 women, Florence Morton and Amelia Collins. 2 years later, Louis Gregory would join the assembly, and over the succeeding decades, it would continue to represent the diversity of the American continent itself.
One of the fundamental beliefs of the Baha'i Faith is that there is a direct relationship between the equality of Black and white Americans and the development of world peace. And if you think about it from a poetic standpoint, it is beautiful symmetry in a spiritual context. And what could be more spiritually and metaphorically and practically perfect than that being the seed of the unity of all humanity?
Shoghi Effendi would later refer to the American Baha'i community as the cradle of the administrative order, how we would learn as a species to govern ourselves for the whole world.
When you then have the structure of the Baha'i Faith, which does not have clergy, we have elected institutions that are elected by one person, one vote, and everybody's eligible. There's no campaigning, there's no nomination, and there's no self-promotion or any other thing. So this is a brand new vision for the leadership of a spiritual community. And so you have local spiritual assemblies that are elected by the same process at the local level. And then nationally, delegates are elected by the various areas, and they come together to elect the National Spiritual Assembly that oversees the Baha'i affairs on a national scale. But this is a far different arrangement than is traditionally practiced by religions because there's still no individual authority.
For 100 years, the National Assembly and hundreds of local assemblies have been engaged in a countrywide endeavor to bring spiritual principles to every neighborhood. From coast to coast, communities are transforming, youth are rising, and children are being spiritually educated.
I'm Passion, and I'm 8.5 and turning 9 October 31st. The prayers you get to sing, and you get to do the prayers that you like. Yeah, it makes me feel like I'm alive.
You see, where we started 100 years ago, the object was just to understand the principles and begin to fashion an administrative organization that would reflect the spirit of the Baha'i Faith itself. In fact, the spirit of all religions. And where we are now is that is sufficiently well established and understood that we can begin to join with others. As we went into the 80s and 90s, the National Spiritual Assembly began to share the Baha'i writings with America at large. So, for example, the National Spiritual Assembly released a series of statements on cornerstone issues that were challenging American society. The first was the statement on race, and it was called America's Most Challenging Issue. It described the Baha'i writings' understanding that this is the time for the unity of the races and the development of one spiritual and human and social family. And so it was a spiritual imperative and a social, political, and economic imperative that the systems that govern human society begin to cultivate an understanding that we are all fundamentally related.
For me, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States and Canada is a cause for not only great celebration, because we've come a long way in a century, but also for reflection. The spirit of those early North American believers was incredible. They were on fire with a flame of devotion for a faith that was still very new to them. And they saw the possibility of their efforts, as small as they seemed, to transform the world.
Each one of us is individually responsible to search for truth. Not the way you see it or somebody else sees it, but what is this truth that lies at the root of the purpose of creation by God Himself? And how do I conduct myself? Well, then if you think about those principles as they guide my individual life, you recognize that there needs to be principles that guide the community, the state, the nation, and the world. And those principles have to be inspired and organized in accordance with the same spiritual understandings and spiritual principles. But they have to have practical structures and practical organizations that will allow us to transfer the benefits of cooperation and the benefits of a very high level of problem solving and search for answers to the complex challenges we face, and turn the community into a prosperous and cooperative social order.
Baha'u'llah has envisioned a new and unique system of administration that goes beyond humanity's previous understanding of governance. The assemblies of North America, alongside a steadily growing number of national assemblies around the world, have provided an initial effort to put his vision into practice. There's now evidence that humanity can move beyond deeply dysfunctional and divisive forms of governance, that democratic elections can be held without any form of competition, and that all individuals have the freedom to be heard and participate. It is a system that produces institutions that are able to operate in an ongoing mode of learning, adjusting to changing social conditions, yet never wavering from the foundational values Baha'u'llah has prescribed. Baha'u'llah wrote, "Hearken ye, O rulers of America and the presidents of the republics therein, unto that which the dove is warbling on the branch of eternity." And later he said, "We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, that all nations should become one in faith, and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. So it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come."